Oh, welcome to the latest event from the Edinburgh Fortean Society. My name's Gordon Rutter and I organise these events. We normally hold them on the second Tuesday of every month at 7:30 in a pub here in Edinburgh. Obviously, at the moment, we're meeting online, but we do hope to be returning back to in real life meetings fairly soon. But we will keep an online presence, so don't worry, we'll still have some form of videos appearing every month, I hope. For tonight's meeting, we've got cryptozoologist and author Matt Bille, and he's going to be talking about some of his books that he's written in the past, including his latest book on cryptozoological books. And he'll be saying a little bit about some novels that he's written and next one he's writing, and also his next cryptozoological book. So thank you very much, Matt Bille. Okay.
The reason I was so eager when I got your invitation is that I love talking to people about this stuff. I love, as I hope you noticed there, I love learning about other people who are interested in curiosities. I think that you and I have extremely similar backgrounds in a lot of ways. What you were talking about with watching those old TV shows, with reading, with devouring the libraries available. I suspect that you, like myself, made rather a pest of yourself at times.
It has to be done. It has to be done. Definitely. Yeah.
So I started out way back in, I kept up this interest for a very long time. I've been reading 45 years or so of oddities and cryptozoology in particular. I know I'm dating myself that way, but as my wife would say, it's not like anyone else would date you anyway. So in I went into a career. I went into the United States Air Force, and in about 1995, I wrote my first book. And the idea behind Rumours of Existence, which is still a nice book, all these years later, was that I'd been collecting all these little nuggets of information about new animals and lost animals and mystery animals. And this being 1995, it wasn't as though people had access to the internet. So I wish there was a book that collected a whole bunch of different aspects and stories and so forth. And there wasn't such a book, so I wrote it. I moved on. I ran a newsletter called Exotic Zoology, named in honor of Willie Lay's work from 95 to 99, and then began work on my second book, Shadows of Existence, which came out in 2006. And in Shadows, I spent more time. In Rumours, I had spent a lot of time on obscure finds that people had overlooked, from insects to lizards to birds, and not just sort of mentioned Sasquatch and Company because everybody else was writing about those anyway. I did go back and write about those animals in Shadows of Existence in 2006. Having a family and real job and all that, as you know, slows one down. So my books have been out about every 10 years. And the way the current book, Books and Beasts, came about was a year and a half ago. And what I did with it, I wanted a book about cryptozoology books, because I think that cryptozoology relies more on books than most fields of endeavor, or even most fields of that are related to oddity type of research. Cryptozoology relies on stuff collected all over the globe from decades and centuries back, and there are archives of that material, but people can't get to those. And because books take at least a little bit of thought and a little bit of editing, I think there's much more information, much more usable information usually to be gained from books than there is from internet posts and so forth. So
that's.
I started out thinking this is going to be easy. I've been reading these books for almost half a century, and it's going to be very easy to put together a book listing them. Unfortunately, I wanted to actually produce a good book, which was not simply compiling things. I spent a year of reading frantically, one might say, collecting books from across cryptozoology that I hadn't read before. And producing, I finally ended up, I set this up as a one-year project with a total of about 280 book reviews in it. It ended up being an 18-month project with 400 book reviews in it. I've got a major pile of books in the garage that I have promised my wife will make their way to eBay someday, because the easiest way to get a book these days is to go to Amazon and have it sent. And there are some ebooks in here, but I like physical books. I'm old-fashioned that way.
Yeah.
So here we are with this collection of 400 books in cryptozoology and supporting sciences, in fiction, the most prominent or most interesting novels. And I'm really proud of what came out. I hope people all over the world will be able to say, oh, this is where I start if I want to build a library. I mean, does that sound useful to you?
That sounds excellent. Yeah. I mean, you get so many people on the internet saying, I'm interested in cryptozoology. Can I go to university to study it? How can I find out about it? And, you've now produced a resource that when people ask that question, you can say, well, here's one way into it. Here's 400 books. Don't try and read them all in one go. But, here's a great selection of cryptozoology books from the past 100 years that you can have a look at. And I know you set the 100-year barrier on there. Is there anything that you regret you've excluded because of that?
Yeah, there is. I said it because I was just trying to put bounds around the number of books. I put all kinds of different boundaries there.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be too overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And one of the boundaries I picked out of the air was 100 years old. The oldest book I ended up reviewing in cryptozoology was Gould's Sea Serpent book from 1930. But I did skip over, that did mean I skipped over some things like Henry Lee's Sea Monsters Unmasked from the 1800s. And there's one, Charles Gould, on monsters that was out in the 1880s, I think, and I cheated on that one. I got it in by using a modern reprint.
Excellent. Ways around all these things.
Yeah, it was, so yes, it was arbitrary, and if I do a second edition, that's one of the rules that will go. This has been pointed out. Basically, the only negative I've heard from readers is that there are things I didn't cover. There are books or cryptids that are covered lightly, and I would love to write a comprehensive work. It would take another year and a great deal more funding. I do intend to do an updated version at some point. I have a list already started of books that can go in.
Excellent. Good. Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have somebody who's complaining that their favorite cryptid, their favorite book, whatever, is not in, simply because, as you've already said, there's not enough space and there's not enough time to cover everything. Have you had books recommended to you since it came out that you thought, oh my gosh, I wish I'd known about that book beforehand so I could have included it?
I don't know if that exact circumstances has happened. There's certainly been people asking about Ben Radford, who I respect, did a book review at CSI yesterday, and he felt that I could have done much better in including books on cryptids like Chupacabras and Thunderbird that I really kind of skipped over. And I do have Mark Hall's Thunderbirds is a classic, of course, and I knew it was a classic and I knew I wanted to get it in, and I was exhausted and it was the end of the time and it just did not go. So there are things I regret, certainly. And I had to limit, you've read it, I had to limit Sasquatch and Nessie books in particular.
Yeah.
And I should have said something. Ben pointed out I should have said something about how I did that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you say in the introduction that you've deliberately done that, but you didn't include your criteria for choice of inclusion. But yeah, I mean, I just look at the Sasquatch and Loch Ness Monster section of my own library, and yeah, it's crazy when you go down that rabbit hole. You could do a single book just on either of on books of either of those topics without anything else coming into it at all. Yeah.
One of the things I really wanted to do here that has not been done was the supporting sciences books. Cryptozoologists can be a very bright lot with a lot of smart, dedicated people. There are people who do not fall into that classification, of course. But of the ones who seriously want to know about whether they're unknown animals and what they are and where they are, so many, I'm trying to say it without sounding pedantic, like I know what you need to read. But because everyone who's serious in cryptozoology needs some background, and more of a background than you get from just a scan of Wikipedia. I ended up, I think, with 150 books on related sciences that I'd read. And I tried to, I started, of course, with the things that interest me. You'll notice there's quite a few books on whales, because I had recently read a lot of books on whales. There are idiosyncrasies created by having, one author working with his collection as a starting point. But I tried to cover things. I looked up some books and some things I hadn't read much on, like primates and human evolution. And I tried to cover everything in the physical sciences, at least, that apply to looking for new animals. There is biology, and there is paleontology, and there is evolution and so forth in there. So I was proud to provide a resource which no one else has provided. So I felt pretty good. Again, there is a list of books that I would add if I did it again. But I thought I gave people a good start there. You know, I skipped over textbooks. You won't find textbooks there. You'll find books by highly qualified authors who produce stuff that is authoritative and accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you just give a list of textbooks or a review of a load of textbooks, that the language is going to put a lot of people off. I know yourself, you've got the background interests and experience of science, because you've done your books on space as well as the various crypto books as well. But for a lot of people, it can, you know, when they're just starting out, it can be a real turn-off to find so much jargon available. I must admit, I think I like the inclusion of the whales books, because I think that's quite a good analogy of some of these things, because we know that whales exist, but because of where they are, very few people have ever actually seen them. And if you go out to look for a whale, you know, you've got an element of luck as to whether you see it or not. But if you do your preparation, if you do your research beforehand, you can massively increase your chances of seeing it. So that seems to me quite analogous to, you know, the state of affairs in cryptozoology. These things are alleged to exist, and if you just go out randomly looking for them, your chances of seeing them, whichever one it is, are fairly small. But if you do your research, you're potentially increasing your likelihood. So there's a lot we can learn from people like the cetacean watchers.
And I like cetaceans here for other reasons too. One is that we have found some by accident when they stranded.
Yeah.
Like in Alaska in 2016, and this whale came up, and a science teacher saw it and called I think a seal biologist. She knew who couldn't identify it, and she called a cetologist, and then it was matched up to some comments by Northern Pacific fishermen from Japan, who remembered seeing a darker colored whale. And it's a reminder of something else important to cryptozoology, and that I spent a little time on a book on the vaquita, the world's rarest porpoise that lives in the Sea of Cortez. The population is down to about 15 max. And despite the fact that this is a somewhat limited body of water, this is a basically human-sized animal that is very, very difficult to find. And so the photographs of tourists have been very important. You know, chance encounters where tourists have seen one and snapped a picture. Those are very, very important to science. It's a reminder that everybody can play a part in this, that citizen science
exactly
matters too.
Yeah. Over in the UK, we have a fantastic citizen science event which gets a lot of publicity every year. It's the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, the RSPB, and every year they do a garden bird watch. So over one weekend, you're asked to devote an hour to just making a list of all the birds that you see visiting your garden during that time. You then submit the information to the RSPB, And they're able to produce fantastic things showing which are the commonest birds in different areas, how the birds have changed over the years, etc., etc. So that's a fantastic way of showing citizen science in action and really producing very, very valuable information, just as you've said there. And it's something that's often overlooked because there are, let's be honest, there are some academics who, sneer about the non-professional, but there are more non-professionals in these fields than there are professionals. Therefore, non-professionals are going to come across these things, and they're the ones who are reporting them and alerting the professionals, as you say, who then come in and do their business with the species that they found, etc. Have you come across the work of Charles Paxton?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, Charles Paxton is done great work. One of the few people with a distinguished scientific background who's been writing on this and producing papers. Not many people even try to write journal papers related to cryptozoology. Fewer still get them published. And so his work is great. I hope he writes a book. I haven't heard whether he is.
To be honest, he spends so much time on papers that I don't think he's ever going to get the time, because he's just based not that far from us at St Andrews, so it's just a short train ride away from here, and he's spoken to the society a number of times. But one of the things that he's done in one of his papers was he looked at the rate of discovery of large species, particularly in the ocean. And I think I'm correct in saying that he took the start date for that as the work of Linnaeus, so 1750, 1760, something like that. And he then produced a graph of rate of discovery, and taking it up to the most recent data he's got, that graph has not yet plateaued. So he's convinced that there are still one or two large species, decent sized whales that are out there that we just haven't recovered yet, that we haven't seen. And he's willing to bet money to various people, but nobody's taken him up on that offer. So I suspect secretly the other academics are kind of agreeing with him, even though they're not necessarily saying that, which is a shame.
That is fascinating stuff. There are still mysteries in the oceans that we do know about, and I hit on a couple of those when I covered the appropriate books. One of my favorites is Wilson's whale from the Antarctic, painted by a extremely qualified naturalist on one of the British Antarctic expeditions in 1902. It looks a little bit like a sort of broad killer whale with a very sharp, thin dorsal, even more than you'd see on an orca. And no one knows what that is. And I asked one very prominent killer whale scientist who said, it's too far south for an orca. I don't know what it is. And you have one of my favorites of all time is the submersible called Deep Star 4000 that was off California in, I believe, 1968, and saw a fish next to them that was a good 10 meters. And the pilot said you could tell because we'd put equipment in the bottom. And it did not, the only fish down there that we know of that size is a sleeper shark. And that's not how they described it. They described a rounded tail and very large eyes. So that one is a wonderful little, delightful little mystery of the oceans. There is a lot out there.
Definitely. Since your book came out, that was November last year. Obviously, the publishing industry continues. You've said that there are already other books that you've you want to include a potential future volume. Obviously, there are going to be new books that haven't been written yet that that are going to make it as well. But is there anything in, I know it's only a very, very short period, but is there anything in the sort of 6 months or so since you finished the manuscript that's come out that you thought, oh, damn, just missed that one?
There are, and I don't remember the titles, but yes, I have listed a couple that that are already that are brand new, and that I want to include in the future. So yes, I still have a good reading list. I've put this project out, and I've alternated the last decade or so with working on zoology books, working on papers on space history and other things, and working on novels. And I've pivoted back to the novel I was working on before this bug got in my head, and I went off on this 18-month sojourn. So I'm keeping up. I'm still reading, but I'm not focusing on it right now.
Yeah, other priorities at the moment. Which of those threads that you just mentioned, which is your favorite, or are they all equal favorites?
Oh, they're all favorites. I haven't done another space book. I did a space history book in 2004 on the first satellites, called The First Space Race, from the 1950s. And that was 6 years of spare time and has 499 endnotes. And I frankly don't think I will quite attempt that scale again. But I've been, I'm working on a paper and an article on some long forgotten small rockets of the early space age, a US Air Force program called Blue Scout. And I'm doing that simultaneously while I am rebooting a novel I call Apex Predator. And I've spoken about this before. It's got to be the longest gestation for a novel ever, because it probably goes back 12, 13 years at this point. But I wanted to write I love thrillers. If you read the fiction section of Books and Beasts, there are some marvelous and some not so marvelous books on cryptozoology, the discovery of a species or the rediscovery of a prehistoric survivor. And I love those books. Even when the science is bad, I still enjoy them.
Yeah.
So I decided, well, I should write a rediscovery thriller where all the science works. And so I wrote this story about the rediscovery of a modern descendant of Dunkleosteus in a lake in Alaska. And I have a page on Dunkleosteus, if you remember our friend from the Devonian.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a wonderful creature. It's the size of an orca. The front third of it is all armor plate.
I actually have one of those little models of it somewhere around. I can't quite see where it is at the moment, but it's one of the ones that some of the model makers make, and it's probably a 6-inch long model of it with an articulated jaw as well.
I have about I have a page on Facebook, Dunkleosteus Torelli. I have about 20 of the models. I'm always trying to collect every model out there. I wrote a nonfiction article on the species for Prehistoric Times a few years ago, and I should do another one. But I thought that I ought to take this, because it hasn't been used much. Steve Alton has started incorporating it into the Meg universe, and I applaud that. Any appearance of Dunkleosteus is good to me. But so I picked it as my revival species, and I put it in Lake Iliamna in Alaska, which is the only place in the world the story works ecologically. The lake is 1,000 square miles and it's so remote there are no roads. And the salmon run is enormous. So fishermen fly in to this isolated lake every year for the salmon, but it's just a perfect situation. And I spoke to a biologist who studies the salmon run in Lake Iliamna, and he said, I'm not sure why we don't have a bigger predator here.
Okay. Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's it. So I've been going through drafts on that. I've talked to Dunkelostheus experts, to lake experts. Interesting sidelight on that one. It is quite common in cryptozoology novels to have a wise old local indigenous person who says you don't want to go there, or, yeah, we know that, but we don't talk about it. And I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
But there are, at Lake Iliamna, there are 3 or 4 different tribes of Alaska natives who would be involved in events like this. And I really hate it in cryptozoology, fiction or nonfiction, where somebody says there's a Native American belief in this, or some use the old language. There's an Indian belief. There's an Indian legend. Native Americans, who pay attention to that are thoroughly sick of it. There are 500 tribes of Native Americans. And so one of the challenges of the book has been finding and talking to people from all the societies who would have to be involved. So that's an interesting challenge, and I'm still not done with it. There is new stuff. I'm still getting feedback from Alaska Native readers. But to go back to the science, if you look at where the species was, the biologist in the book says there are 2 different pathways by which it could have ended up here if survived the extinction at the end of the Devonian, and eventually pushed by competition from reptiles and then sharks and then orcas, up into this lake, and adapted. So that's been terrific fun to write, and I hope to have it back to circulating to agents and publishers in another month or so.
Oh wow, excellent!
There's lots of Easter eggs for cryptozoologists.
That's good to hear.
Fiction, and I said this book, fiction is a little more important for cryptozoology than it is for some other fields too, because we don't have field studies of the habits of Sasquatch, or the habit, or the persistence of spotted lions in East Africa, because we can't find them. But fiction lets you speculate.
Yeah.
There is some wonderful fiction on Sasquatch among the not so wonderful fiction. But there are people like Eric Penz in Cryptid who have done some marvelous speculation. J.M. Bailey, in what she calls the Eve trilogy, have done some fascinating speculation backed with intelligent real science about what creatures like this might be like and how they might live. And so that's very important that cryptozoology has that body of exploration.
Yeah.
Leaving out all the books about, I think I said that Pteranodon Mall is an absolutely wonderful title for a book, but
yeah.
Pteranodons taking over a mall and munching people really doesn't merit any sort of inclusion.
And there's a whole subgenre of Bigfoot pornography, which I'm glad to see you avoided as well.
Oh yes, there are all those books where Bigfoot does not exactly run around in the forest by himself. And, I made a very deliberate effort to make sure I never even mentioned the existence of it.
Good.
We definitely don't need that.
So within your book, would you say there are a top 3 books that you would recommend to a budding cryptozoologist, or somebody just starting out and they want to get a flavor of the field?
Yeah. And I tried to prescribe like a top 12 or 15 when I was going in. But I think you have the foundational texts, of course, the Jedi texts, right? From Havelmans and from Sanderson in the 1950s, early 1960s. I would probably suggest somebody start with Carl Schuker's. Now the title escapes me. I've got it here somewhere, but I think he called it In Search of, doggone it. What did Carl call his latest book?
I'm in a different room to my cryptozoology books, but let's see if I can quickly.
But I would start with the works of Carl Schuker right now, because he's got 2 marvelous recent books, one on mystery animals around the world and one on discoveries and rediscoveries, that are established, and that's more accessible to the reader in 2020 than Havelmans and Sanderson. And I suggest reading those and then going back and reading the more foundational works. There are other good starting ones. Coleman's Cryptozoology A to Z is a very nice, short, lively intro.
So the Schuker books are Encyclopedia of New and Rediscovered Animals and Still in Search of Prehistoric Survivors, the creatures that time.
Yes, those. Yeah. Oh gosh, don't tell Carl I couldn't even remember the name of his books. That's embarrassing. But that is where I would point somebody to start. And of course, there are other modern works that are very good, and Coleman's is one. And you really have to read Abominable Science, Prothero and Loxton. Many cryptozoologists think the most abominable thing they have ever met is this book. And I don't like the tone of it sometimes. I don't like the more dismissive tone of it. But you have to read it. You have to understand that these are the reasons most scientists do not accept the major animals of cryptozoology, and you have to know that. Otherwise, you're just hearing this echo chamber, and you can't approach scientifically without that.
Yeah, you need to see it from both sides of the argument, as it were. As you say, that book does put a lot of people's backs up. Richard Freeman, you should hear him talking about it. For example, he does not hold anything back when he's talking.
No, and it has some mistakes. It's not a perfect book by any means.
So we were just talking about the Loxton book there.
Yes, and it's I've got nitpicks with it myself, but you have to read it. You've got to understand that thinking, even if you're sure it's wrong.
Yeah, and as you say, you've already mentioned Ben Radford, who's a skeptic, but is slightly more open-minded and is willing to look at the evidence than certain people. And he's, you know, Ben's definitely done some sterling work, and he's totally willing to engage with all sides of the argument, as well as writing for Skeptical Inquiry. He's written in Fortean Times, etc. Whereas, you know, there are other people in that camp. I can't imagine writing for Fortean Times. So, you know, yeah.
I suppose that since your organization and your interests are Fortean, we ought to touch on that boundary line between cryptozoology and other phenomena.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, we call ourselves the Edinburgh Fortean Society simply because we try to include the whole gamut of things. So there are some of our regular members who would specifically say they were hardcore cryptozoologists and things like that. So we've got, you know, all manner of people within the group. So some are definite cryptozoologists, most are general Forteans, general interest in the subject. But yeah, touching on the differences between Forteana and cryptozoology, and indeed the similarities. Sounds cool. Yeah.
Well, I have an interest in all kinds of things. I have focused on cryptozoology simply because first of the need to focus on something. With you can't study everything at once, and because as a science writer, I like that this is the mystery where you will get concrete answers. I mean, this is science. I have no problem with people who are interested in, you know, reports of apparitions and other things. But if you're going to get any scientific respectability for the study of cryptozoology, then it has to be zoology. You know, to me, reports of Bigfoot appearing and disappearing, and says that's for parapsychology to worry about. Zoology is hard evidence in physical animals. And my opinion is that cryptozoologists who want any dialogue with zoologists and biologists and wildlife agencies and so forth need to hew strongly to one side of that line.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, with cryptozoology, ultimately you could turn around and put the body on the table and say, "There's my proof." Whereas with many other aspects of the Fortean world, it's not as concrete as that. It's much more nebulous and much harder to come down on one side.
You know, as a believer in God, it would be totally irrational of me to say the material universe is all that exists. You know, so I'm interested in other things, and I'm interested in geological oddities and unidentified aerial phenomena and so forth. But I think every time we lump those with cryptozoology, we diminish the chances for cryptozoology to be taken seriously.
Yeah,
I think they are just separate fields of endeavor.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and you know, we do see that on a daily basis. I mean, you mentioned the Wikipedia definition of cryptozoology in your book, and the very first sentence of that is something like cryptozoology is a pseudoscience.
Yes.
It
and it shouldn't be, but it sometimes practices one. Yeah. Not just because of the association with, you know, apparitions and whatever that some people do, but because cryptozoologists themselves are often much more enthusiastic than they are scientific. And that is, that goes back to what we talked about in the book, why I included, 100 books on sciences that cryptozoologists should understand. If cryptozoology, I noticed the other part of that definition is cryptozoology is a pseudoscience and a subculture. We're definitely a subculture. I mean, everybody's kind of proud of that fact. But what should be a science is so often practiced as a pseudoscience. And that's to me, that is incorrect and unfortunate.
Totally agree. I mean, I think we can all agree, we can all think of various groups of people who just go off into the woods, run around shouting and screaming, carrying guns and claiming to be cryptozoologists. But, if there's anything there when they go in, the noise and the racket they're making as they go in is just going to scare anything off. I mean, if you look at something like the hunt for the ivory-billed woodpecker and see how that's been carried out, as opposed to some groups who are supposedly trying to find Bigfoot, you're not going to find it like that, guys.
The ivory bill rediscovery, which of course has largely been dismissed right now, but I'm holding that open 1%.
Yeah,
I'm not absolutely convinced it's gone, but it's been carried out by people who go into the swamps and stay there.
Yeah. And don't shout and scream at every branch cracking and, just observe patiently and know what they're doing. And they've researched it before they go in as well. So they know the sort of places that it should be found in. And they look. And if you don't look, you don't find. It's as simple as that. Did we mention the blog?
Oh, it's called Matt's Sci-Tech blog, Sci/Tech blog. Sometime after I created it, MSN created one with the same title, which was not sporting of them. But anyway, yes, I try to include reviews on the newest books I've written and some articles from not just cryptozoology, but all the other things that interest me. There's stuff occasionally from physics and from paleontology and so forth.
And there's quite a lot of stuff there for people who want to dip into it as well, because it's been going since 2005, and you seem to average pretty much a post a day in sometimes.
I've fallen off while I've been working on this project.
Understandable.
I'm trying to get back to regular posting there, but I hope it's valuable to people. And I have started collecting some pieces out of that for a future book that just sort of chronicles the kind of discoveries that have been made. And Shuker and Darren Nash have done the same thing, I've noticed, with their blogs. And the results are really good. Yeah. Their books are really good.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for your time there, Matt. And thank you for a really interesting talk. And hopefully people who are not aware of your work previously will now seek out your things. And also, as I say, the latest book is definitely a great go-to place for people who are wanting to start out in the subject of cryptozoology and putting them on the right foot, not just giving them the background in cryptozoology, but giving them some recommendations in background in science as well.
It's been fun.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank
Cheers.
you.